It is my pleasure to introduce our afternoon speaker, Ingalill Wahlroos-Ritter. Ingalill is an architect, educator, and community leader, advocating for architecture to advance environmental, political, and social justice. In her architecture practice, Ingalill navigates diverse types and scales of projects. One of the largest is the Los Angeles Mission. At over 150,000 square feet, it is one of the nation's largest service providers for the unhoused. Ingalill has taught at Yale, Cornell, and SCI-Arc. She has served as Dean of Woodbury School of Architecture from 2016 to 2021. And she currently serves on the NCARB board and serves as the president of ACLA, which is the new nonprofit organization launched by the AIA here in Los Angeles to focus on education and community outreach. And most recently, which I think she's going to focus her talk on today, is her professorship, her recent teaching at the architecture department at East LA Community College. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ingalill.
Okay, so I talk for a living, and yet I'm always nervous every time I start. So let me double check my slides. Excellent. Okay. So thank you so much for having me here. I want to especially thank Stacy Nesbitt, Sona Gevorkian, Tracy Stone, and Ismael Peña, my former student, for inviting me to talk today and this amazing event. And this organization is so near and dear to my heart, as you heard. I am the 1989 recipient of an AWA+ scholarship. So the title of my talk is Transformation, Architecture, Activism. I was really moved by your theme, what's next, navigating change and transition. So I thought it would be okay for me to talk a little bit about my own personal and professional journey. So I called my talk Transformation, Architecture, Activism, and by activism, I define this as, or it is defined as, an intentional act to bring about social change, political change, economic justice, and environmental well-being. So my question today is, how can architecture bring about social justice? And I want to show you 3 projects. One, a design project, a teaching journey, and then the advocacy that Stacy talked a little bit about in the introduction. So let's start with design activism by answering this question, or posing this question. How do we address societal issues with integrity and vision in our design work? So this is me. I am half each one of these. I grew up in Finland, and when I was 14 years old, I moved to the San Fernando Valley. You can imagine how. So I have a little bit of each of those very much part of me. Fast forward through education, and I started to go to school. I went to UCLA and got my undergrad in math, actually, and history, and then went on to study architecture in the master's program. During my you can see some of the internship work that I did. Frank Israel was an incredibly huge inspiration of my life. I went back and worked in Finland. But I was recently reminded that I had the incredible fortune of having Norma Sklarek be on several of my juries as a student at UCLA, and it was amazing. It was as amazing as you can imagine. But what really struck me about her life, and this is sort of the theme, I think, a little bit of my talk, is that she, and I don't know how much you know about her, she was the first of so many things, Black woman architect, California licensed, first AIA Black woman member. But she was a fierce architect and designer, and she started at SOM, Gruen, Welton Beckett, and then she, when I was a student, started her own firm, Siegel, Sklarek, Diamond. And so, but through it all, she just remained herself, and she didn't identify, or she didn't define herself by each of those firms. She stayed fiercely herself throughout all of those. And I'd like to hope I'd like to think that eventually that's how I'd like to think of myself as well. So I started working then after graduation here in Los Angeles for Barton Myers, one of my professors. But this project actually launched me into New York. It was 1994. The earthquake shook me out of Los Angeles and into New York, where I started working for Venturi Scott Brown. And so this was the project we worked on. Of course, it doesn't look like this, but I was put in charge of the clock, which is kind of cool because I had done a lot of facade work for the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. But this amazing woman was my boss. And it was the first time, of course, I had a female boss, Denise Scott Brown, and we all know the history of her not being recognized for everything she did. But I do think it's worth thinking back and reflecting on the people who have touched us and who have changed us. And she was by far, I think she was the first one I had ever really heard talk about accessibility, using architecture as a language that could speak to everyone. I had never heard that idea before as a student. So that really, again, just sank into my mind. So fast forward, I left Venturi Scott Brown and started working for Smith Miller Hawkinson, and I was here for 7 years. I was the project architect on this project, 4 years after school, but put in charge of a $64 million project. And so in those 6 years, I learned how to become an architect. It wasn't in school, sorry. It was in the field on the construction site. All things glass. And what was interesting was we weren't able to find engineers who would work with us. We had to go overseas to find the kind of knowledge and talent because we were really, I think, at the time breaking barriers. Glass floors, glass stairs, now we see them everywhere, but in 1999 that was not the norm. So this was an amazing project. I had, again, a woman boss, Lori Hawkinson, who was a huge influence on my life. 7 years later, I decided to step away and open my own firm, Ingalill Wahlroos-Ritter, mouthful. But Corning Incorporated then hired me to work on, I did about 7 projects in 2 years, and this was one of them. I'll show you just very quickly 2 of them. This was the summer stage. I call it my glass ceiling project. But it really was a way for me to then begin to investigate this material a little bit more closely. And what was amazing was being able to work with the glass artists. So this was another project that I worked on, the Glass Studio, which was the school for glass blowing, which is all part of the Corning Incorporated campus. So I then, in January of 2001, I met a man, and 6 weeks later, I married him. It's true, at Cornell. And we then moved to Europe. And I lived in Vienna for a while, and then we moved to London. And when I went to London, I knew nobody. I left my firm behind. I left everything behind. So you'll see this is a theme in my life. And I started working, I reached out to the engineering firm that I had worked with on the Corning Museum of Glass. And so I then opened up the office here in Los Angeles for the glass engineering firm, Dewhurst McFarlane and Partners, and then had the great fortune of working on these amazing projects. This one was with Morphosis. This was Angela Graham, Fenninger Scholl. This was the Portland Aerial Tramway project. If anybody's been to Portland, it's an amazing, fun journey to take. And then fast forward, had this incredible opportunity to work with my best friend from grad school, Doris Sung, who is the chair of architecture over here at USC, but she invited me to be a facade consultant on this visionary project using thermobimetal as a passive material. This is a whole lecture in and of itself, but I just wanted to quickly show you my journey and my pathway. So these are just a few shots of that material, thermobimetal, that curls passively with the sun. And so this whole project was really trying to, you can see the petals are flat in the shade and then curled and allowing for ventilation when the sun hits them. So this was a really wonderful experience. And so, I wanted to, architecture is a team sport. And I do nothing without support. And these are the women who support me. And so we all lean on each other. This is the group that I had throughout the pandemic. Literally every week we got together. We share things. We text each other every day. In fact, I was sitting at that table just momentarily. We're doing a dance thing tomorrow for the birthday of Doris, Annie, Amy, Yolande, and Alice Kim as part of this close-knit group. But just surround yourself with people who inspire you, and those who don't, you don't need them. So I have tried really hard over the years to just really, kind of celebrate positivity. And so that's very much a part of the sort of journey that I have set myself on. I mentioned it earlier, but one of the things we didn't talk about at school was ethics in architecture at all. So this is going back to the 1980s. And so when my partner and I started our firm, we wanted to put it front and center. This is what we believe in. This is what we value. So this is our landing page for our website, Good Design. We believe that every human being on the planet has the right to beautiful environments that we live in. So putting it out there. Thank you. This is our second landing page. Community is the foundation of architecture. Our table talked a lot about community. We can define communities in a lot of ways. And third, of course, buildings generate 40% of annual global CO2 emissions. So no project in our office doesn't embrace those values. So this just, very quickly, my partner and my 14-year-old are both pilots. It's amazing. Being the parent of a child who flies planes is nerve-wracking. But one of our fun projects that we never got to build was this one, a glider port out in Pear Blossom, California. And then this is another little project, all speculative. Of course, this is the dirty secret of architecture. So much of our work is speculative and never gets built. But we have had the fortune of building a lot of our work. This is one right in Tracy's neighborhood. This is a David Wiseman studio. This is an adaptive reuse of an existing Butler building. He's a high-end, incredibly talented artist, but one of the things we really wanted to make sure is the spaces that we designed, the most beautiful spaces is for the people who work there, not for the designers. Don't tell David I said that. So here's the courtyard space where all the people who work in that studio. It survived the sort of deluge that we had this winter with the rain. That was very much a part of the design. Of course, every small firm in Los Angeles, this is what we're, as Dana said this morning, we're working on oodles and oodles of ADUs in our office as well. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about is this project that we renovated 2 years ago. We were invited, believe it or not, we were invited by the contractor to come and work on this project. It was the renovation of the Los Angeles Mission, one of the nation's largest service providers to the homeless in downtown. This is a 1980s building, 1990s building that was built and they moved from their original location. There are privacy issues. We haven't yet been able to photograph the space because it's in total, as you can imagine, in incredible use of the space. But these are just a few of these images from the project. It is, as I said, 156,000 square feet. It's in downtown Los Angeles. And the spaces, we got to work on every single space. And as maybe you've noticed, the space that we really focused on was the ceiling, thinking that the ceiling was the one space that would get the least amount of wear and tear, and really focusing our attention on that space. These spaces are multi-purpose. This was used as a vaccine clinic throughout the pandemic. But this is the reality of these shelters, these tightly packed bunk beds, and we really wanted to address that and change that. And so we worked very closely with the city of Los Angeles to try to create these spaces that really talk about dignity and providing beautiful environments for, and really changing. The LA Mission went from a type of institution where people were spending only one night there to a space now. This was part of the California Alternative to Incarceration program, where the residents really were spending multiple weeks in the shelter. And you can imagine how important that was, especially during the pandemic. So we designed this home unit within the shelter that provided some privacy. We tried to use every single space to create different types of sort of shelter or sanctuary spaces. This is the rooftop sort of fire pit area. There's no fire pit there, but and then the rooftop garden. So it's a community garden. This hasn't been built yet, but it is part of the next phase of the project. Again, this was something that it came to us because of the contractor we had worked with in a tenant improvement project in Orange County. We built a really great relationship with them, And when the architect that they were working with didn't work out, they came to us and asked us to work on this really remarkable project. And I have to say, I showed you some woo-woo projects, but of all of them, this is by far the one closest to my heart in terms of trying to find a place that brings together all of those values that I talked about earlier. At the same time, as a designer, and I'll go through this super quickly, I founded a gallery, the Woodbury University Hollywood Gallery. Some of you may know the WUHO Gallery, in 2009, and produced. And in a way, this was my happiest, was to be a producer. And we produced over 100 exhibitions over the years, largely self-funded, grant-funded, but it was a way to put forward voices that had not been celebrated. So of course, this is Paul Revere-Williams' work, but it's the photographs by Jonna Ireland, and really finding voices and finding people. This was our annual exhibition of community colleges, inviting all of the community colleges throughout Southern California to exhibit every year. This was an initiative that we launched. This is Jennifer Bonner filling the gallery with water. I do not ever advise this. It leaked. This is Nate Imai's. It was an opportunity for faculty, for students, for people in the community. We invited community nonprofits to use our space as a shared space. This is a Skid Row exhibition where we had people from downtown Los Angeles actually who were part of the photography exhibition. James Rojas, of course, a pop-up urbanism. And so what I hope you can see is this idea that providing a platform for voices, putting out there as much as possible into the public realm. And this is something that Audrey and so many of you in this room already do. But I think that goes to the heart and soul of what we do here at AWAF. So these are student exhibitions, the work of student work that we were so very proud of. This was a group from Tahiti. This is that combines the Beaux-Arts tradition. The French Polynesian is part of France, of course, so these students were educated in Paris. I find it so fascinating, and yet they go back to their traditional indigenous voices and find ways to meld the two in these really beautiful ways. The LA Forum shared our space, the Los Angeles Forum. So when we lost the space, because it's now being developed as a housing project, a lot of voices, we lost a lot of space also for the nonprofits as well. So that's something we're trying to address with our new AIA space. This was one of my favorite events, was this Now What exhibition that I started with. You can recognize a lot of those wonderful women. Again, life is a TP. We all lean on each other, right? We all just share each other's burdens. And so these are women, Kate and Gabrielle, Nina Briggs, of course, and Sharon, another incredible trailblazer, where we all lean and support each other and find ways to share each other's love. Teaching activism. So this has weighed on me over the years. At what point is the cost of architecture education no longer sustainable? And I think that we are in a unique position in architecture. We're a profession. We're vocational, and we should celebrate that. And it took me 57 years to get to the point where I can say that in public. So over the years, because I had to quantify it for my FAIA package, back of the sketch notebook, I've taught in my classroom over 2,000 students. Every student, most of them are now my Facebook friends and LinkedIn. I have a lot of LinkedIn friends. It's been an incredible journey. So I started teaching at Cornell, and taught there for several years. And what you can see from the student work is I was always focused on sustainability and the building envelope. And so Yale, I taught at Yale for 5 years. It was glass that it had them come to me and say, you need to develop courses on glass. I learned to teach, though, in London at the Bartlett. And so I'll go through these very quickly. Taught at SCI-Arc. Woodbury University, where I taught for 17 years. And at Woodbury, I then also started working as an administrator. So I was an administrator at Woodbury for 16 years. And these are just a few of the programs that we launched during my leadership. I think the class of 2019, there's some of you here, but we were really focused on the real world. and trying to, and also providing a space for the student voices to participate in education. Listening is something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of us, and so really being quiet and listening to the students, having the students really participating in developing the curriculum, and then this idea of transdisciplinarity, launching new programs, applied computer science, construction management. Kishani is the chair of that program at Woodbury now, sustainable practices. So these are the new programs that we started while I was dean there. It was this initiative, the Year of Housing. Every year we identify, it was part of one of my initiatives, focus on the pressing issues of our time. So the entire school then focused on housing one year, focused on climate justice one year, and intelligence was the third year. And the housing brought me to speak at the United Nations headquarters, talking about how students could participate in addressing housing. But throughout those 22 years, you can see I taught at private institutions, and it really weighed on me, the debt that the students left school with. And so one of the initiatives, this could be a whole lecture in and of itself, but this is talking about all the different pathways that students have with price tags on it. And I just started this chart about a couple months ago, because I really wanted to try to quantify for students what the pathway really entails. And I wish somebody had explained this to me when I was a student. So this is an initiative that we are doing as part of ACLA, but really trying to help students understand all the different options into architecture. So when I left Woodbury a year and a half ago, it took me about 3 seconds before I decided that I wanted to teach at a public institution, and this position came up at East Los Angeles Community College, and I jumped on it because it's free education, and trying to make free education as good as possible. I can't think of a better use of my time. So this is, I'm now teaching, thank you. And let me tell you, every day that you teach is the most inspiring day, but it's also heartbreaking when you talk to these students and you hear about their lives and you want to do everything you can to make their pathways easier. So that's basically what I'm now doing, has to do with advocacy. So let me just finish up here. I'm chairing the NCARB Education Committee for the National Council of Architecture Registration Board. Does anybody know what this map shows? This map shows the states in the United States that do not require a NAB-accredited degree to become a licensed architect. So it breaks my heart as an educator to look at this, but it's also a very viable pathway for a lot of students. Imagine going into architecture debt-free. So this is something that one of my initiatives is to make this entire map blue. So this is, part of it is traveling to different community colleges. This is in El Paso throughout the country. This is a whole lecture in and of itself, but I organized after the Dobbs decision last year, and I was shocked at how many firms didn't want to participate in this conversation, but that's a whole conversation over a martini later on. So let me just finish up. I'm now president of Architecture for Communities Los Angeles. It's a brand new organization. The day I stepped down as dean, I got a call from Barbara Buza, who was the founding president of this organization. You cannot say no to Barbara. And agreed to then work on this organization. Tracy is one of our amazing board members, and it's an incredible community. We're focused on educating, education, K-12 education, and community outreach. And so K-12 programs is one of our projects. Supporting higher education, future professionals is project number 2. And community outreach, one of our initiatives is try to get an architect on every single of the 99 neighborhood councils in Los Angeles. And I end here with this wonderful Design by Diversity Day that was organized by Elise Robles, who's there to my right, and brought 700 incredible children, parents, architects, professionals to celebrate Norma Merrick-Sklarek. Thank you very much for listening. Time for questions or or Kane? Oh, hi, Dana. Thank you, Dana. So Dana was a student when I was at Woodbury, so she was just sharing. Thank you. Thanks. Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, yay. Well, this is also maybe echoing that inspiration. First of all, Ingalill was my advisor and my an educator for throughout my trajectory at Woodbury, and an inspiration for me to be an educator. So I want to first of all say thank you for that impact in my life.
We're so lucky to have you as an educator. So thank you, Isma.
So on that note of educating and inspiring, I think I come back to that question every time I teach. How do we listen? How do we inspire? And how do we provide the tools by which to continue to do this very hard work? So maybe you can speak on that a little bit more.
Well, the only way I can answer that is, you know, as Dana mentioned this morning, I'm a white woman. I recognize my privilege, but I also, that's why I teach at the community college level, because we need, for this profession to thrive, we need different life experiences. We need people who have lived experiences so different from us. And when I invite people like you to my classroom, students listen and they notice. And what I find really interesting is that this generation is redefining what it means to practice architecture. This generation is redefining what it means to be, redefining gender. I mean, to me, that's mind-blowing, that we don't have to define ourselves by gender. I love this organization, but this organization shouldn't be necessary. It's the same thing with architects. You know, it is a white, male-dominated institution. And the only way, and that's why I was showing some of these initiatives, that we need a revolution. We need radical change, because these are systemic structural problems. And getting people like you into the classroom, helping students understand that there are alternative pathways, I think that is the most inspiring thing to do. So thank you for taking on that path. I love that the students are engaged. Thank you. Yeah, I think they want it to be recorded.
Thank you so much for that. I was wondering if you touched briefly on talking about recognizing it as a vocation. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's so important. And what are the ramifications of that definition and how we look at the field?
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, history is really important. And if you look at history, how architects define themselves has changed radically over centuries. You know, you think about the master builder and how the Beaux-Arts really changed the way we think about the architecture, liberal arts education. You know, as I said, my undergraduate degree was in math with a history minor. And so, and yet, not a single year went by as a dean or as an administrator that people in the profession didn't say to me, oh, well, students aren't learning what they should be learning in the profession. And my response was always, well, that's your job. That's the profession's job. But it, you know, as a small firm owner, I began to think, well, no, that doesn't seem right to me. And I think it was President Obama who really began to ensure that schools, that there was accountability, that when we were sending students out, if we said that we were training them to be architects, let's make sure that they understand what that really means, that they're not disillusioned when they enter the profession, that they understand the nuts and bolts, literally and figuratively, of the profession. And so I think vocation in higher education has become a negative word, when in fact it talks about passion and it talks about something you love doing and that you do really well. And so I think it's something to be embraced. And this idea of apprenticeship I find really fascinating. So when I went to the AIA board and talked about the experience-only pathway, they were really interested. And they're like, well, how can we help? And it means the firms, you're hiring students that are probably more junior than you're used to hiring. They're not fifth year or BArch students or master's students. They are 2 years out of the community college program, but they have vocational skills. So you can actually put them into certain areas to do work that a lot of students in some of the other programs aren't able, the skill sets that they don't have. So I can talk about this for hours because I think critical thinking is critical as well. So in community college, what I'm trying to do is to find space for both of those and recognizing that these students are working full-time, they're supporting their families, many of them are unhoused, and that's a whole other conversation. So thank you for asking that question. All right, well, I think that's enough, and thank you again for having me, and